How often do you meet with a typical guided small group?
For typical kids, I usually meet one time or 2 times a week. It's usually about as many as you're going to get in.
And how often do you meet with struggling readers?
Every day. And sometimes even twice a day. I'll pull them in the morning, and then if we have a minute where kids are doing what they need to be doing, I go ahead and pull that group again.
Which components of literacy did you address in your small guided group?
Well, I want to, kind of talk about the 5 that we're looking at. There's phonemic awareness. That's understanding that sounds make up our language. This group knows that. There's phonics. That's knowing letter sounds. This kid knows that. I mean, these kids, they know letter sounds. That's not something I'm going to address. There's also sight words. These kids all have over 200, 300 sight words. So that's not something I'm going to address with them. What I am addressing with them right now is that retail and that comprehension piece, and that's based on that DRA that I got from Riley when she really needed a lot of prompting to understand what was going on. And it's also just something I know from my running records and having groups with them every day, that comprehension and retail, something I'm going to focus on. One of the other components of literacy is fluency, and I worked on that a little bit too because that impacts comprehension. For instance, there's a story about this girl that doesn't want to help her mom with the garden, and do I have to? And come on, it's going to be fun. That's what's going on. That's the dialogue between the mom and the child in this story. And that fluency piece, they really need to be reading it like that so that they have a good understanding so that the story makes sense.
Based on the small guided group, what are you going to do tomorrow with them?
They've reviewed that comprehension journal that they showed you that Brennan was enthusiastically showing everybody. So we're going to really look at that because I think writing it also helps them understand it. And they're going to go through that and write on that. And I think that then we're also going to practice retail with that. Something that I'm going to do with this group probably not necessarily tomorrow, but probably next week sometime, is I think that they're ready to put sticky notes as they're reading and writing down a couple of things that are happening throughout the book. I think that that's sort of the next stage that I'm at because that's going to give them more meat in their retail and it's going to give them more comprehensive retail. I think that's what they're ready for.
I noticed during the small guided group that some students were wiggly. How does that affect their learning?
That's such a great question, and that's something every teacher is always balancing. And I'm thinking about little Brennan, and they're on the floor, and of course you're going to have a little less wiggles if they're at a table than on the floor. I prefer the floor because that's just sort of where the kids are really comfortable. When you're watching those kids and sort of their learning behavior and their physical learning behavior, you want to notice whether they're still engaged and still learning what you want them to learn. For me, like I talked about, I was really talking about whether they were understanding and comprehending the story and able to do a retell. So when Brennan is wiggling and doing his kind of 6-year-old boy thing, I'm really looking to see what's coming out of his mouth. Is he still talking about the story? Is he still engaged? Is he still comprehending it, understanding character, solution setting? If he's on the floor and he's on his hands and knees and he's giving me that information, that's my goal. My other goal, of course, is that I don't want him disrupting or distracting the learning of other kids in the classroom. So my eyes are kind of on Ashley and Riley to make sure that his level of wiggling isn't distracting them. So I'm listening for their responses, which they're, again, keyed in and they're responding. And I'm also looking at the rest of the class because remember we have 20 other kids in the class and seeing if that's continuing to grow. And I feel like they're able to focus while he's doing that. And my biggest thing is that if I stop Brennan and he's not able to do any of that kind of wiggling, that his learning is compromised because he's a kinesthetic learner. And we talked about the different modalities. He's somebody who learns well when his little body is moving. And that's evident, I think, in what he was able to give me.